After more than 25 years, the Soledad Cross case is finally resolved. Some San Diego experts believe the lack of affordable housing, the lack of housing period, has reached a crisis point. The homeless living on downtown streets have nowhere to go, which is a problem for everybody. And San Diego's success with the living wage law shows that raising the minimum wage requires enforcement. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are Matt Hall, head of the opinion section for the San Diego Union Tribune. Hi, Matt.
Hey, Mark.
Good to see you today. Former LA Times reporter Tony Perry. Hi, Tony.
Good to be here.
Glad to have you back. KPBS reporter Susan Murphy. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Mark. Great to be here.
Glad you're with us today. And reporter Chris Young of iNewsSource. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Mark.
Well, the case took so long, more than a quarter century, that the man who filed the original lawsuit has been dead for 10 years. But now it's over. The Mount Soledad Cross case ended with a whimper this week with a simple ruling by the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals. Tony, start with this case. Who filed it and what was the issue?
1989, a man named Paulson, who was a Vietnam veteran and also an atheist, but a man who felt that it was wrong that the city have on its property a 43-foot Christian cross, thought that was wrong. Jim McElroy was his attorney, and away they went. And Paulson died some years ago. But the case continued. Jewish war veterans, ACLU, all jumped in. The city fought, and then just got exhausted and gave it over to the federal government, Department of Defense. But it has now been settled to the satisfaction of both the folks that want to keep the cross and the memorials that have now been part of it for some period of time. They're pleased, the ACLU is pleased, and what happened was, to satisfy a federal law, the property beneath the cross, which is visible, by the way, from Interstate 5, was sold to a private Soledad Cross Memorial Association, $1.4 million last year. And the ACLU looked at the sale, the federal government looked at the sale, and said, yeah, this seems to settle it. This seems to satisfy what the Congress wanted, what the Ninth Circuit wanted. And so this case is over after a mere 25 years.
The court says it's private land now, so the issue is moot.
What has always struck me about this is people of goodwill, both sides. One side saying we cannot allow the city of San Diego or a federal agency to promote a religion in this diverse nation of ours. Other side saying we are a military community and this is a war memorial, not just a cross. Well, that is a bit of retro thinking because initially it was just a cross. And they had Easter services.
Religious symbol, yeah.
And in recent years, a whole bunch of years, it has morphed into a memorial with, I think, 3,000 plaques dedicated to individual veterans out there. And
but that's all in recent years.
That's in recent years, and so the litigants on the other side have said, hey, no, this is a cross, just putting those plaques there. The other side said, no, it's a memorial, always has been, and the courts have pretty much always sided with those who say, no, it's got to come down. A decision in 2008 by a federal judge in San Diego said, no, it can stay, overturned by the Ninth Circuit. The U.S. Supreme just didn't want to deal with it, although they gave some body language that said, if it ever gets to us, we're kind of leaning towards allowing it to stay.
Right.
This deal was cut with the help of the United States Congress. Department of Defense sells it, 1.4. I presume there's attorney's fees. There are always attorney's fees.
Yeah, it's listed in there, but we don't see the breakdown.
It seems to be over now.
Yeah. Well, Matt, I wanted to ask you, the UT has covered this thing for all of these years. What gets people so riled up about this on both sides of this issue?
I mean, look, it's an emotional issue, and you're right. We've covered it for years. I think the list of reporters' names at the UT who has covered this might be longer than the ballot this November.
Just saying something.
And I'm one of those people, covered it for years. I actually have a bet. You mentioned the lawyer Jim McElroy. I didn't think this thing would be resolved in my lifetime. I bet him a cheeseburger at downtown Johnny Brown's. And now downtown Johnny Brown's is closed.
It's gone.
I don't know if I can make good on that bet. Sorry, Jim. But look, it's an emotional issue. People, a lot of veterans are used to going up there for sunrise services on Easter, Memorial Day, Veterans Day. Look, everyone knows this view. As you said, it's visible from the 5. You see the cross as you're driving down it. It's one of the better views in San Diego. You're up at the top of that on a clear day. You can see for miles.
For people who may not be familiar exactly where this is, it's way up in La Jolla, panoramic view near the ocean or above the ocean, actually.
Yeah, well put. I mean, you get a 360-degree view of San Diego and high enough up where you can really appreciate kind of what this city looks like from the mountains to the water.
Right.
And I think the first cross was built in 1919. There's been, I think, 3 crosses total over the years. So this is something that has stood to one extent or another for a century. People are used to it in La Jolla. There are a lot of people who value its presence, others who say what Phil Paulson said, which is it doesn't belong on a government land. Now that issue is resolved. I think 25 years is a long time to fight about any issue in San Diego. Maybe now we can turn to the seals and resolve La Jolla's second longest running fiasco.
Well, there was a court case, Supreme Court in 2012, that said a very small cross on public property and federal property in the Mojave Desert could remain. Now, this is a much larger cross, and it was once on city property. But it is thought that that sort of undercut the argument of the litigants, of Jim McElroy and the others. The sale idea had been done once before. There's no new tricks in this game. But this time, I think the city of San Diego got out of the way of the whole thing years ago and got it over to the federal government. I think the federal government got tired. And just said, let's settle this. Because there are crosses on any number of federal buildings. Do we need to mention cemeteries like the one out in Point Loma? On the other hand, this is a diverse community, and why are we doing this? Why are we seemingly saying one religion above all?
Well, okay, well, that one's settled. We won't have any follow-ups on that, hopefully. We are going to move on, though. If you had a home in the San Diego area for many, many years, great. You probably don't worry much that the news that the home prices here have shot up another 6.4% in the past year, leading the state, or that the median price for a single-family home here tops $545,000, and 2-bedroom rentals are $2,200 a month. But young people, the middle class, the poor are well aware of the absolute crisis stage we've reached in housing here. Now, Matt, a recent Union Tribune editorial, you called us the death of the dream, death of the American dream, the California dream here. How bad is it now?
I mean, crisis is a cliche that we throw out pretty commonly, so we doubled down and decided to use the cliche of the death of the American dream, which really shores up the point. I mean, we used to talk about affordable housing and worrying about getting people on the lower income into houses. Now it's the middle income. Families are coming to a point. You go to a barbecue on a weekend, and chances are you run into someone who says, "Oh, my kids can't afford to live here." That's a heartbreaking thing to hear as a parent.
They
move out of state,
right.
Because this is really a thing from Southern California to Northern California. Governor Brown tried to do something pretty bold, and we supported him all along the way, where he wanted to allow housing by right. So you could construct houses if you set aside 20% of your stock for low-income housing, 10% if you live near a transit area. But that proposal, he tied it to some affordable housing subsidies, which is what many people think helps this issue, but our editorial board says doesn't do enough, kind of nibbles at the fringes of that issue. And he ran to a brick wall. This thing sailed through.
His proposal was going to reduce the red tape, streamline this, get housing built.
The short version is that it was going to streamline regulations, which there's a 2015 Point Loma Nazarene University study that says in the county, the cost of regulation adds about 40% to a house. So we're talking a big chunk of money.
So this was a big
Streamlining
deal.
it would theoretically put more houses on the market, allow more people the opportunity to buy a house, and make it easier for everyone. But he ran into some opposition, some big opposition. Environmentalists opposed to it because it would weaken CEQA. Construction labor unions didn't like it because they wanted prevailing wages tied to this, and Brown didn't want to do that. That adds obviously cost to developers. And so he kind of ran into this opposition, and the thing skidded off a cliff. And so our editorial board, in that editorial, made the point that this is the death of the American dream in California playing out in real time, and that legislators are fooling themselves if they come back and say, we reached an agreement on climate change or anything else happened in this session. This is the biggest single issue in California today, and they didn't come close to solving it.
Tony? Welcome to the limits of government. I mean, there are certain immutable laws, and I think supply and demand is among them, and there's a lot of demand and only a limited supply. Now, when we got here, I got here in '79, I thought I was $20,000 short, that if I'd gotten here a year earlier, if I had 20 grand more, I could have bought. We hitched up our pants and got a first, second, and third. Now I think if I was to move in, I'd probably be $600,000 short. Right. And I don't know where I'd get that, maybe a 10th and 11th loan or something. But yeah, San Diego may be shutting down, as Northern California, as San Mateo County, Santa Clara County, San Francisco, Marin, Alameda to a certain degree. This may be, we've reached max. We can't take any more people.
The Bay Area is a complete nightmare. You hear anecdotally stories of 15 firefighters out of 100 in a certain district living 100 miles away. Yeah. You hear stories of high school students whose parents can't afford to live where they want to go to school.
Commuting so longer than they're in school. Yeah.
Exactly. Hours just to get there. And it's, something's got to give here.
Susan,
it's amazing. When my mother passed, and the house therefore was going to be on the market without any advertising, the Silicon Valley people were at the door offering enormous amounts for this little house built in the early 1950s for the GIs.
Notices, huh?
Literally.
Yeah.
And I don't know how the pipeline gets out, but and that was some years ago, and now it's even worse. Yeah. California may just have reached max. We're not going to get any larger. Yeah. Growth control has arrived.
Well, Susan, you did a story on affordability, the San Diego, and compared it with, where were the high points of that study?
Well, this study was by the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce. It shows San Diego's pretty much at the bottom compared to 10 metro areas, including Denver and Seattle and Austin, Texas, that our paychecks don't stretch as far. We're spending 33% of our paychecks on housing, and it's affecting businesses because the top talent in the country, they're opting to go to a place where they can afford to buy a house versus San Diego, where they'll have to live 100 miles away to buy a home.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it really is. And as you say, it's simply scarcity and these prices going.
Yeah, I know, Matt, I've heard the Point Loma study. Frankly, I'm dubious on that. It's supply and demand. And you can always sell the idea that it's government and those regulations. Yes, but when the supply and demand changes, suddenly it's more affordable. So I'm a little dubious that it's, all those regulations.
Building more stock is going to make it easier for a lot of people. It may not happen in the kind of immediate time horizon that a lot of people would like, but if you keep doing it, it's going to make a difference. It just will. What's interesting to note is that there was a study done a couple years ago, or maybe it was a survey, not a study, but that showed 90% of millennials in San Diego think it's unrealistic that they'll ever own a home here. Mm-hmm. So that's shifting too, right? So if young folks don't think they'll ever live here, maybe they don't even try to make a go of it.
Yeah, and at some point the market just closes them all out. Well, I'm sure we will have much more in this story as we move ahead. And we'll move on to our next topic. In 2005, a large political battle raged over a proposed San Diego ordinance requiring city contractors to pay their workers what's known as a living wage. Business owners issued dire warnings on financial doom. Workers' advocates spoke of human rights and moral justice. And the living wage law passed a city council by a single vote. It went into effect 10 years ago. iNewsSource looked at what's happening in the ensuing decade. And Chris, start with the overall conclusion. I mean, if you had to give us a couple of words, has it worked out okay?
Yeah, I mean, in short, it's done pretty well. I mean, for the most part, the gloom and doom that was predicted by critics of the law back in 2005 when it was being debated really never came true, and workers say it's improved their lives, and businesses say it's been good for business in many cases, and it hasn't bankrupted the city.
What kind of workers are we talking about?
So it's a small sliver of the city's workforce. So this is city contractors, mostly landscapers, janitors, security workers who work at Qualcomm and Petco Park and stuff like that. So it's a small sliver of the workforce, and they're making the pay is close to $15 an hour. That's including health benefits. So it's about $12.21 plus $2.45 in health benefits, and they also get 10 paid vacation days along with that too, which is also big for workers.
And the workers say that it's overall pretty well worked out for them, right?
Yeah, so I spoke with one worker who 2 years ago was working at a landscape job that with a company that didn't have city contracts, and he was making about $11 an hour there, not including health benefits, and also didn't have paid vacation. And now working for a company that does a lot of city business, he makes nearly $15 an hour and gets paid vacation and health benefits, and says, for his family of 4, their lives have improved, and he's able to go on vacation, come back, and he's got a whole paycheck.
Really has kind of changed his life.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about one of the fellows you interviewed, Mike Salsanu, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, has a contract with the city, pays his workers according to this law. Here's what he had to say about the living wage.
We have much better retention, and with retention comes increased quality of service. You are able to keep employees that have the knowledge of the field and the area without having the turnover. It's a whole different scenario.
Well, as we said at the outset, there was a fierce debate on this. And how about those people who were so strongly opposed? What are they saying now?
So I reached out. The Regional Chamber of Commerce was very opposed to this when it was being debated, and they've quieted over the years to the extent that when I reached out to them, they didn't even grant an interview request.
Not an issue anymore.
And a lot of people I talked with said that speaks volumes. The idea that they're not still vocal about this, but I did speak to a couple business owners who did say that look, there were some negative consequences of the living wage. They one company, Aztec Landscaping, which is one of the biggest city contractors,
very big contractor,
exactly, said that when the law went into effect, they weren't able to keep all the jobs that they had, so they had to cut a few jobs. But they said, it's been good for their workers. They acknowledged that. But other businesses I talked with, the Downtown San Diego Partnership is one of the major living wage contractors. And they said that, look, they weren't able to do as much hiring when they signed their most recent contract with the city under the living wage. But they've seen improved morale. They've seen a reduction in turnover, and they've seen much better quality of service that they've had. So they said the pros outweigh the cons.
Okay. Now let me ask you about enforcement here. How does the city rely on making sure people who are entitled to this get paid the living wage?
So they do two ways to do enforcement. There's responding to complaints, so doing investigations on worker complaints, and then they also do compliance reviews or audits to make sure that employers are following the law. Now, the workers advocates say, it's really key that the city do those audits because a lot of workers don't feel empowered to really come forward and complain to their employers about, especially low-wage workers. And then, business owners like to have, the city out policing because then that keeps the other employees that they're competing against honest.
Okay, we do have a bite from Claire Crawford, City for Policy Initiatives, on this enforcement issue.
Right now, the city has the ability to do proactive enforcement, so it's a question for the mayor of whether they will choose to do proactive enforcement. We think it's critical, and we really think that if you look at the lessons learned from the living wage enforcement, the picture is very clear that you do have to do some proactive enforcement in order to ensure that employers feel the obligation to comply.
All right, and she's really talking about the minimum wage there, but they're first cousins. What's going to happen when the minimum wage kicks in now, and we're going to have to enforce that?
Exactly. So the minimum wage has kicked in, went into effect in July, and now what a lot of people are saying is look, you can look back to the living wage experience and the enforcement there as the city goes about to try and enforce the minimum wage. Now, a lot of people, including some city officials, want to do proactive enforcement, but here's the problem with that is you have a much broader workforce that the minimum wage is going to apply to, but the budget for enforcement of the minimum wage is essentially the same as what it is for the living wage, which covers a small fraction of that workforce. So it's going to be really hard to be able to do the compliance reviews and the complaint investigations.
Major concern.
Has the attorney ever brought any legal action against anyone on living wage, or is he too busy shutting down pot stores?
So there have been a couple contractors that have run into some issues with violations over the years. The city in total has recovered about $600,000 in back wages for workers that didn't get them because of violations. But there's one contractor that ended up being debarred, not able to get city contracts anymore because of an egregious violation of the law. So there have been some serious violations.
All right, well, we'll have to watch that going forward. A lot of time on that segment and see what happens as we move forward with the minimum wage now. Well, of the many challenges and indignities of living on the streets of San Diego, finding a proper restroom ranks near the top for homeless people. The city is currently paying for public toilets at St. Vincent de Paul and the Neil Good Day Center, but these are often closed. It's a problem that affects not only the homeless, but those who live and work nearby. And Susan, you surveyed the East Village. How many homeless that is, and how many public toilets are we talking about down there?
Well, there are upwards of 1,100 homeless people living on the streets in East Village. They live in tents, on tarps, makeshift shelters, in cars. And when I went around looking for the public bathrooms, got a list from the city, there are 9 public toilets and a handful of urinals. That doesn't include, of course, some businesses. There's also the library kind of in the vicinity, but...
And not all of them are working all the time. That's one of the issues we're dealing with, right?
Right. Well, when I went over to St. Vincent de Paul to look at their bathrooms, they have a men's and a women's bathrooms. The women's has 5 stalls. The men's was actually chained up and locked. They were out of service that day. St. Vincent de Paul told me that rocks had gotten into the pipes and the system was clogged. Residents tell me it's an ongoing issue, not residents because they have bathrooms. The people that are able to use the bathrooms, the homeless people
come in off the
area,
street and use the bathroom.
Right, have said that it's an ongoing problem.
Okay, and they've got the city has a contract with St. Vincent de Paul, and what are the details on that?
So let's go back a little bit. The city purchased 2 bathroom units called Portland Loos, and they put them up in the East Village. They are like metal containers with a flushable toilet hooked up to the city's sewer system. They paid $560,000 for these units. Because of complaints, they removed one of them within a year at the cost of $60,000. Now they contract with St. Vincent de Paul for $80,000 to $105,000 per year to provide bathrooms that are open around the clock. So
nothing cheap about this entire
It's
problem.
interesting that we're at
Matt?
this point because this is really a problem of the city's own making. Those Portland Loos were a disaster. They said they would bring them in at a certain dollar amount, and the ultimate cost was much higher. They had problems hooking them up to the city sewer system. So the thing was a debacle. And then, as was pointed out, I mean, the crime problem down there was really dramatic. So when they pulled that one Portland Loo out, it's like, I thought it's probably just a matter of time before they pull the other one out. There are far fewer crime problems at that one. But it seems like if the city had, $80,000 to $100,000 seems a far better investment than $500,000 to install these things.
If you look at the police records, in the 6 months after they were installed, there was really only, I think, 1 arrest between the 2 bathrooms. There were no drug arrests. People were complaining that there was prostitution and drug use, but really those, if you look at the police reports, it doesn't really pan out in that way.
Well, let's talk about, you interviewed a woman at St. Vincent de Paul, Ruth Brulin, talked about a challenge keeping those toilets working, as we were noting. Let's hear that.
Individuals will sometimes use the toilets to put shoes, clothing, and so we do have to unstick those things. This is a challenging population to provide restrooms for. They need them. We want to do it, but it is never dull.
So that's just an ongoing concern here. But what happens to, the obvious question is these folks, they haven't got enough toilets, haven't got enough working toilets. Where do they go?
Well, this is where the conversation goes south. I mean, I talk to a lot of people who live on 17th Street and 16th Street. A lot of them have 5-gallon buckets. One woman I talked to who hadn't been homeless very long said she used to make the trek to find a clean and working bathroom, but she has just kind of given up on that. She says that she puts her, dumps her bucket in the trash. She says a lot of people dump it down the storm drain. Some people don't use a bucket at all. They use the bushes, the sides of buildings, and wherever they can find
whatever
a place.
they can do. And now you're getting complaints. You work downtown now, and I used to work downtown for many years. What are the folks who are down there and the businesses, and what are they all saying to the city?
East Village is a problem, and you mentioned the problem for people who work and live down there. Think of the people who go into Petco Park. I have a colleague who went there with his son this past weekend, and his son was like, "Oh, look at all this dog feces on the street," and his dad didn't have the heart to tell him, "Well, this
those
is
aren't
not
dog feces."
Has any city? I mean,
Tony?
San Diego is not the entire world. It isn't really the center of the world. I know we don't like to think that, but it isn't. Has anybody solved this? Los Angeles, San Francisco, Denver, New York. I mean, homeless are everywhere, and they all have bowel movement needs. Anybody know how to solve this problem?
Yeah, I think in Portland, that's why those became so popular. Those Portland loos have gone up all across the country, and I think in Portland is really the only place where they are actually working. They can be power washed, but other places, I guess, like San Diego, people are complaining of increased crime.
Don't you have to
Tony?
Position a cop near them? I mean, when I used the Portland loo that was later taken out, I had to wait while 3 people shot up heroin before I could get in there. More cop presence in the East Village? Would that help keep people from misusing portable toilets?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the solution is really. Ruth from St. Vincent de Paul was telling me that she has noticed an increase in the number of people who are mentally unstable.
Well, it's a problem I'm sure the council is going to have to take up, and we'll just have to see as we go along. We have run out of time. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Matt Hall of the San Diego Union Tribune, former LA Times reporter Tony Perry, Susan Murphy of KPBS News, and Chris Young of iNewsSource. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, that's kpbs.org, And I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.